Yes, good evening. My name is Wallace Bradley, and I'm the host of the Bradley Report. And it's presented by United Peace, Inc. I'm also the chairman. No, let me get that right. I'm also the president of United Peace, Inc. And the individual that helped produce this show, she's also the chairman of United Peace, Inc. And that's none other than Terry Marsh Bradley. Got a very interesting show for you. We're gonna show the legacy of State's Attorney Kim Foxx. We also gonna show Congressman Danny Davis as he tells the people thank you for voting for him. And as you know, with little time I may have, we're going to make mention of the fact that there's a new state's attorney that will be in the office December 1st, 2024. And that's the former appellate court judge, Eileen Burke. So without further ado, to God be the glory, that's my story. And Sister Money, let's hit that piece by Kim Foxx.
You know, first of all, I think it should be deeply concerning that the turnout in this election was so low. Based on numbers that I'm hearing, 20% turnout in the city, 15% turnout in the county tells me that we have an electorate that has not been engaged, and that's very troubling, not just for the state's attorney's race, but for our democracy as a whole. I think what we have seen in this race, again, are ideas that were not dissimilar on many aspects, and voters having to make a choice about what they want to see in their next state's attorney. I certainly hope that this comes to resolution very soon. I have an office of incredible attorneys, administrators, and investigators who have dedicated themselves to a career of service, who certainly this moment of anxiety around what their next leadership looks like is something that they're deeply concerned about. So it is my hope that this is resolved very quickly, but I think, you know, people have asked, is this a referendum on something? I won 2 elections. In 2016 by 30 points, in 2020 by 20 plus points in the primary. I've not seen an election for state's attorney this close in my lifetime. And so I don't think it's a referendum on an individual. I think we have, over the last 8 years, begun a really robust conversation around what criminal justice and reform looks like in Cook County. And I think the electorate, even the small electorate that voted, are engaged in that discussion.
Safety, crime seem to be very big issues. Talk a little bit about what you perceive your legacy to be and what you would hope that the successor would take up.
You know, I hope my legacy is that we're talking about safety and crime in more than just individuals and personalities. One of the things that I've talked about, I grew up in this city, I grew up in this county, I grew up in Cabrini. I grew up in an era where we had homicide rates that would shock our values today. I grew up in the 90s here as a young person and saw homicide rates that would make the race today pale in comparison. I've seen this violence. What I haven't seen when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s was that the state's attorney was responsible for violent crime. That wasn't the narrative. And I feel compelled to slow it down because everything that I've read over the last couple of days about what this election says, about who is going to make us safe, I wish that the kids that I grew up with who died to violence were safe. I also wish that we had a level of engagement around justice and reform so we aren't paying $45 million settlements, that we aren't exonerating people after decades in prison. That the legacy that I hope that I have left in this race is like real conversations about safety and justice and violence. And that we as a public stop minimizing the pain that we just talked about today to personalities. No one individual is going to change the trajectory of crime and violence in this city. It is not possible. And anyone who promises to do so is not being intellectually honest. So what I hope my legacy is that we have really difficult conversations that sometimes don't have really simple answers, and that we stop politicizing death and pain and real legitimate fear and work collectively on long-term lasting solutions.
Are you concerned your legacy could be undone?
Oh, I mean, my legacy is a girl from 624 West Division, the child of a single mom, who grew up in this city in one of the toughest neighborhoods, who got an opportunity to go to college, law school, become a prosecutor, and the top prosecutor. What I know is when I see little black girls and black boys and people who live in neighborhoods like the one I grew up in, they know that it is possible to come from an environment like the one I came from and not be a statistic. That legacy, that cannot be undone. I'm also very proud of the fact that a lot of the initiatives that we've done, bail reform has been codified into law. We're the first state in the country to eliminate cash bail. That the work that we did of not prosecuting low-level marijuana offenses turned into legislation that legalized marijuana. That we vacated the convictions of tens of thousands of people without having to pay a dime. That over the course of the last 8 years, and I recognize that we talk about one person a lot who didn't go to prison, but there have been hundreds of largely black men and women who have walked out of prison for crimes that they didn't commit. I want to remind people, and not in a way that makes us feel bad, but about what's important for the next state's attorney, that this county had a history before I became state's attorney around wrongful convictions, around brutality, that has to be reckoned with. When we don't reckon with it, we will continue to see it play itself out. So my legacy, I think, is when I did the first mass exoneration back in 2017, we'd seen nothing like that in the history of Cook County. In 2024, we are no longer questioning whether or not our system was broken, and instead we're actively working to fix it. So no, I have no concerns about whomever comes in and does this work. And let me say, I think either candidate, again, inherits an office that it doesn't matter who the leader is, of people who have chosen to do this work on behalf of community, and either candidate will be incredibly lucky to work with the men and women of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office.
Are you at all concerned that the patience doesn't exist for the reforms that have started under your administration, under the Johnson administration, for all that hard work to be carried forward to the point where it starts to pay off?
I think the reason that this race is so close is because there are people who are impatient with the way things have been. Couple points. This will be interesting for your folks. When I ran in 2020 and won by 20 some odd points against now Alderman Conway, who spent $13 million in that race, I won by 20 points on the wake of Jussie Smollett. People said they wanted change. When I look at the results of the election so far, in the neighborhoods that are most impacted by violence, and I see where those votes are, it tells me that the people who are directly impacted by crime and violence in this system are still demanding something different. And I just don't think we have to pit downtown versus Inglewood. I think we have to have a conversation that says, so as Inglewood thrives, downtown will too. And that's the disheartening part of what I saw in the later part of this campaign, is that we had people thinking they had to choose. I am confident, because of the narrow votes, because there is not a mandate, if you will, to roll things back, that they won't.
Do you think that will translate to the suburbs? Because as I'm sure you're aware,
I'm very aware.
numbers were flipped, suburbs versus
Absolutely. And in 2016 or 2020, I did not carry the suburbs at the same level that I did the city. And look, we have to have conversations. You know, there are some suburbs, I want to be clear, Robbins, Harvey, Dalton, who have real issues of violence that we need to address. And we have other suburbs who have the benefit where violence and other quality is not as big of an issue as quality of life crimes. And those concerns have to be addressed too. But I just will say the thing, because I'm not running for re-election. We also have to talk about race. We have to talk about race. And the reality is that in these conversations, particularly as we talk about cities, suburbs, and the neighborhoods that have been impacted, we are afraid to touch the third rail, which is race. Too many black people are dying. Too many black people are going to prison. Too many black neighborhoods are falling under the weight of the violence that we're talking about here today. That's real. And too many of them have seen their friends and family walk out of prison from a system that wasn't fair. And for some people who don't know that reality, who see what they see on the news and can't comprehend why people in those neighborhoods have a distrust, if we don't tackle that, we're gonna keep doing this. That's why I started that I grew up in this city. I'm not making this up. I am, in as much as I'm a lawyer and a policymaker, I'm a kid of this city. If we want to address violence in a meaningful way, we know how to do it. We actually do. We invest in neighborhoods like the neighborhoods that Superintendent Snelling and I grew up in. I say this all the time. Cabrini is a completely different place today. They didn't have grocery stores when I grew up there. But they're so flush with resources, they got a place called iFly, where you can jump out of a fake airplane on Halsted in Division. When I lived at Halsted in Division, we didn't have access to medical care. And the violence in those neighborhoods were skyrocketing. It wasn't the people, it's the conditions. There are neighborhoods on the west side that have not been rebuilt since the riots of 1968. And it is not a surprise that those neighborhoods that have been disinvestment have high incidents of crime. And it's not black people are inherently more dangerous. We have black people living in neighborhoods that have been disinvested, and systemic racism has not allowed them to live their best lives. That's just it. And these are complicated, nuanced conversations, I get it. But if we don't have them, I'm running out of patience. I'm out of patience, but I'm also out of a job in 7 months.
So getting back to the legacy question.
Yes.
Is Kim Foxx's legacy that she just made this place a little bit more fair?
I think Kim Foxx's legacy is that we've made it a bit more fair. Also, I should say, nationally, the field of prosecution has shifted. The field has shifted from Chicago to San Francisco to LA to Boston to Philadelphia to Manhattan. The field has shifted. That where we once were known as the false confession capital of the United States, we have led the country in the exoneration of individuals 5 out of the last 6 years. That once where we were the only office that shared felony level case data, every major prosecutor's office in big cities share their data. That marijuana legalization has spread and prosecutors have led the forefront. It is one, I think at the end of this, I will come and surround myself with the number of books that have been written about me in this office. And people don't know that. There's several books that have been written about this administration. But we've been so caught up in John Catanzara hates Kim Foxx. And I get it. He should. He should. We don't share the same values and belief system. But that is the least of what my legacy will be. We've changed the field of prosecution. And yes, in the city of Chicago, we have made things better than when we found it.
You know, I want you to understand the legacy that Kim Foxx is leaving. I was going to bring on another story, but I think it's very important with these last 5 minutes that I get you to understand. Eileen Burke won the state's attorney's race in 2024. The people that support her wants to bring the state's attorney's office back to the way that it was. And the way that it was before Kim Foxx got there, police misconduct, police torture, police murder, police corruption, all that was covered up by the state's attorney's office. You heard about John Burge You heard what Kim Fox said, how many individuals have been exonerated for crimes that they didn't commit. Over 150. As of today, 2 individuals that were exonerated for a case that they did in 1994. They have been out penitentiary 3 years. They just received their certificate of innocence for the crime that they didn't commit. John Burge had a crew of detectives that tortured individuals to confess to crimes that they didn't do. Some of the individuals had cattle prods thrust into their body part, their derriere, to confess to those crimes. And the old way those cases was covered up. Eileen Burke, the case that they said as the assistant state's attorney, she prosecuted an 11-year-old child and knew that it was wrong. The officer was a part of John Burge's crew that arrested the young boy. He also was responsible for arresting so that the assistant state's attorneys, up under the old state's attorney before Kim Fox got there, was a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old for a murder that they knew they didn't do. The same guy, James Cassidy, was a part of John Burge's crew that was responsible for torturing 4 more juveniles. They ended up spending 15 years in the penitentiary before they were exonerated. And the reason I'm saying that, because the individuals that put the money up to elect Eileen Burke were the same ones from the Trump MAGA crew. The police union president, everybody know how racist he is the same one that did a video in support of Eileen. So I'm saying this. By God's mercy and grace, everybody can turn their life around and go from a negative and be a positive. I'm saying that because I am of the opinion and belief that Eileen Burke could become a great state's attorney. But don't let those that supported you and pushed you to become the state's attorney, if you're gonna go back, then go back to what Kim Fox has done and add the right things that you want to do to make the state's attorney's office fair for everybody. Even God has touched my life. I know He can touch your life to make it where you learn from the mistakes. I want to say, to God be the glory. That's my story as an individual that's working on His doctrine for urban ministry and for social justice. To God be the glory. That's my story. And Eileen Burke, people are going to be watching you. I'm willing to help you to become a great state's attorney for Cook County, because you won the election fair and square. You got your voters out. Let's make it do what it do.